Morning, everyone. Honorable members of the opening plenary, Minister Maria Ohisalo, former Prime Minister Paavo Lipponen, Director General of IOM Antonio Vitorino, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi, and Director General of ICMPD Michael Spindelegger, other distinguished invited speakers, and all the conference participants from over 40 different countries. On behalf of the Finnish Minister of the Interior's Migration Department, as the IAM Steering Board member for Finland, and on behalf of the conference organizers, the European Migration Network Finland, whose national conference this is, represented here by the national coordinator, Dr. Kielo Pruis, the European Policy Centre, represented by Head of Migration and Diversity Programme, Dr. Maria de Sommer, and the Odysseus Network, whose annual conference this also is, represented here by Assistant Professor Lilian Jordi. I would also like to acknowledge here Professor Philip de Breaker, the founder and chairperson of the Odysseus Network, who has worked very hard to make this conference happen, but is unfortunately unable to be with us today due to force majeure. And it's my great pleasure to warmly welcome you all, both our foreign guests, as well as the Finnish participants to this truly international conference, which is organized as part of the Informa program under the Finnish presidency of the European Union. And may I also take this opportunity to wish happy United Nations Day to us all, and particularly to all the representatives of the UN organization and its affiliates present here today. An impressive group of high-level EU and national officials, representatives of international organizations and NGOs, politicians and members of the academic field are gathered here for the next 2 days in order to come up with suggestions and ideas for the future handling of different aspects of migration, asylum and integration in the European Union. I'm looking forward to an exciting conference with fruitful outcomes. The title of this event, From Tampere 20 to Tampere 2.0, first of all refers to Tampere conclusions, adopted by the European Council in October 1999 under the Finnish presidency, as the groundbreaking political launching pad for the new EU policies on migration, asylum and integration. Secondly, this title urges us to take note that 20 years on, despite much development in these policy areas in the form of several 5-year programs and guidelines adopted by the European Council, many of the issues raised in the Tampere conclusions are still lacking comprehensive and effective long-term policies, urgently needing to be addressed. For the area of freedom, security and justice to become an everyday reality in European Union, both for the EU citizens and third country nationals, the values and many of the concrete suggestions of the Tampere conclusions are still useful in formulating policies for the future. Their relevance has not diminished. On the contrary, it's striking to note how much the text of these conclusions reflect today's situation. Just a few quotes to illustrate the point. The aim is an open and secure European Union, a greater coherence of internal and external policies of the Union. The Union needs instruments to tackle illegal immigration, to reinforce the fight against trafficking of human beings and the economic exploitation of migrants. The European Council calls for the assistance to countries of origin and transit to be developed in order to promote voluntary return. These are not just historical quotes from a 20-year-old document. They are also the present-day reality and some of the very issues that this high-level conference is addressing and which the present-day political decision makers in the European Union with its member states are striving to find solutions to. With these reflections, I now invite some such politicians involved in tackling these issues both in Finland and in the EU as a whole, the Minister of the Interior, Maria Ohisalo, to come and give the opening words on behalf of the Finnish EU Presidency. Please, Minister Ohisalo, the floor is yours.
Distinguished fellow speakers, esteemed participants of the conference, ladies and gentlemen. The tragic incident in Essex, England yesterday highlights the darkest aspect of international migration, human smuggling. We would like to take a moment of silence to honor the memory of the 39 lives lost. Please join us in a minute of silence. Thank you. Dear participants, it is my joy and privilege to welcome you in Helsinki and bring you the greetings of the Finnish Presidency of the EU Council. This conference marks the milestone of 20 years from our first presidency and the important Tampere conclusions in the area of migration and asylum. Let me first take the opportunity to thank the European Migration Network for its important contribution to a stronger evidence base for our policies and for making this event happen. I'm also honored to be accompanied by such an impressive ensemble of speakers for this opening session. During the 20 years since Tampere, migration has never ceased to be a topical issue. But now we truly find ourselves at a critical juncture, both globally and within the EU. The root causes of forced migration, such as the climate crisis and youth unemployment, are going to be with us for the foreseeable future, and they will only intensify unless our efforts to tackle them are significantly scaled up. It is vital that we use all available policies, tools, and incentives to address these root causes. But in parallel, we also need to enable and support migration that is safe, dignified, and orderly. Our success in these tasks in a sustained manner is a legitimate expectation of our citizens and necessary to inspire a more positive narrative on migration. The peak migratory years of 2015 and 16 taught the EU member states many valuable lessons, and now we need to ensure that we are better prepared for any future challenges together. At the same time, the core values that the European integration is based upon have to be fully reflected in our policy. In particular, we should never lose sight of the principle that every human life deserves equal protection. The pillars establishing the Tampere conclusions are still very relevant today as part of the comprehensive approach to migration. which is the core of our strategy in line with the European Agenda on Migration from 2015. First, we have the structural components such as financing and the role of the EU agencies. Work is ongoing to prepare the next multi-annual financial framework, and regarding migration, securing adequate funding for both long-term action and ad hoc needs is necessary. Equally, the mandates of the key agencies have been under scrutiny during the past legislative cycle. The amended regulation on the European Border and Coast Guard is soon coming into force, while the regulation developing the European Asylum Support Office into an EU asylum agency is still under consideration by the co-legislators as part of the larger reform of the asylum system. A well-coordinated, ambitious action by the agencies is essential for an effective implementation of our common policies. Second, partnerships with countries of origin and transit of migration were recognized as central already 20 years ago. But the external dimension of our policy has gained in importance and variety since then. The starting point is to be aware of what is happening on the various migratory routes and what to expect next. We have to be truly forward-looking and make sure that all relevant data, projections, and scenarios are fully utilized in our policy making. More broadly, the aim is to integrate migration as a permanent and structural component of EU foreign policy. We need to strengthen the EU's common approach, for instance, by accelerating the work related to the external aspects of the European Agenda on Migration, the high-level dialogues, the tailor-made country packages, and the Valletta Action Plan. The continent-to-continent dialogue with Africa is the newest key element of this common approach. A third aspect highlighted in Tampere conclusions and still relevant today is the goal of better managed migration, which is of course closely linked to our third country partnerships and the overall ability to address challenges preemptively. Capacity building in border security and joint anti-smuggling efforts are classic examples of this. It is equally important to provide opportunities along the routes, including measures such as assisted voluntary return, support for local integration as well as resettlement, depending on the circumstances. All of this has to be done in good cooperation with our partners, developing tailor-made solutions while paying attention to the bigger picture in the spirit of a whole-of-route approach. An important component of the external dimension is an effective and sustained cooperation with third countries in return and readmission. This area has proven to be challenging in recent years, resulting in a low return rate in the EU. There is a shared political willingness among member states to address this issue in order to achieve a balanced and credible common policy. We need to cooperate with countries of origin in a more holistic way to promote return policies while fully respecting human rights of returnees. The Finnish presidency is fully aware of the sensitivities in this area, including the potential challenges in reconciling various interests. This is why all discussions have to be set up in an inclusive and open manner. I would also like to highlight that in order to encourage voluntary return and ensure the sustainability of returns, we should pay more attention to supporting the reintegration of returnees. Reintegration efforts are relevant not only for the individuals concerned, but for the receiving communities more broadly. This means that a well-planned policy and practice from the EU side could contribute to a more positive rhetoric towards returnees. A fourth pillar in the Tampere conclusions refers to the fair treatment of third country nationals, which is anchored in the legal migration policy as well as integration efforts. Indeed, we should not forget that legal pathways continue to be an essential element of the comprehensive approach to migration. It is noteworthy that a lot of progress regarding the EU legislation in this area has been achieved during the past 20 years. Today, the admission conditions, procedures, and rights have been harmonized for a multitude of migrant categories, including rules on easier mobility between member states. In fact, the legal framework is so broad that the Commission has recently completed an extensive fitness check to see how well it responds to current needs. The digestion of the results is still in progress, and the Finnish presidency supports this exercise of awareness raising and analysis so that we may identify where the EU can bring the greatest added value compared to the actions of individual member states. On the Council side, the focus in current discussions is on making the legal channels attainable and providing accurate information on the applicable rules rather than expanding the scope of the legislation. Promoting the use of legal pathways is essential for the EU to meet current and future needs for skills. Moreover, it is an important demonstration of the EU's commitment to long-term partnerships with third countries. Several labour migration pilot projects are underway or being prepared in the member states. They are an important element in paving the way for an enhanced common approach to legal migration, testing new areas and tools of cooperation. Resettlement of refugees provides a safe and controlled avenue to Europe for those entitled to international protection. Finland has long-standing traditions in resettlement, and we wish to see this activity take root sustainably in all member states. Global resettlement needs are significant, and the EU is called upon for determined leadership in this area. The first Global Refugee Forum in December will be an opportunity to demonstrate this leadership and a commitment in a concrete manner to sharing responsibility with countries hosting large number of refugees. Finally, a fifth central element of the Tampere conclusions and today's comprehensive approach to migration, I would like to touch upon the reform of our common asylum system. As we all know, in 2015, the record numbers of asylum seekers caught us unprepared and revealed many weaknesses in our systems. It is equally well known that reforming the system has been politically challenging, leaving member states divided in their views. However, having been at the center of these discussions during the Council presidency, I can confidently say that we all agree that solutions are urgently due and they must be found at European level. This is true for the simple reason that there can be no functional Schengen area free movement without a balanced asylum system. Important work lies ahead. We have to focus on our shared goals and the needs that made the reform necessary in the first place. The President-elect of the new Commission has promised a relaunch of the reform, and the Finnish presidency does every effort to support the Commission in this task. The current EU asylum rules mean varying treatment of asylum seekers across the EU and an uneven distribution of responsibility, which in turn are factors encouraging secondary movements from one member state to another. It is time to work towards restoring trust and spirit of cooperation among member states. This will build basis on which we may move forward and find a compromise in a spirit of fair responsibility sharing, meaning that every member state complies with agreed legislation and practice, compliance is adequately monitored, and no one is left alone to deal with migratory pressure. It is also crucial that through a more advanced use of information systems, we will get a clearer picture of how asylum seekers enter the EU and how they move across the Schengen area. Only with a better understanding of the status quo we can we ultimately take the next steps. Regarding the trickiest piece of the puzzle, the reform of the Dublin system, efforts have not been shared during previous years to find a workable compromise. The basic objective of the system is clear: ensuring quick access to asylum procedures and the examination of the merits of the application by one member state only. The most essential question is how to ensure a more sustainable sharing of responsibility, including provision of timely and adequate support for a member state facing particular pressure. Indeed, answering this question and thereby finding a way out of the SEAS deadlock is our key task for the near future. In the meantime, we still have a need for practical disembarkation arrangements following search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean. Through continuous coordination activity, the Commission has been able to relocate asylum seekers rescued in various SAR operations to a group of committed member states. There are ongoing efforts to broaden that group, including the recent agreement reached among 4 member states in Malta. Such pilot projects are to be welcomed as small steps forward, while determined work continues towards a permanent reform, guaranteeing a fair sharing of responsibility in all situations. At the same time, in particular, due to the situation at the eastern Mediterranean route, there is an acute need to discuss more broadly the possibilities to support member states under pressure. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude with these final words. An often cited sign of progress in policymaking is not having the same discussions as the year before. Against this background, it can be considered frustrating that our priorities still fit under the same headings as they did 20 years ago. However, in our common policies and practices, we have come a long way since Tampere, and many of the issues we are facing today, we could not even envisage back then. Now we must use the imagination once more, paint an improved picture of the status quo, and focus on making it a reality. In this conference, we have the perfect opportunity to set in motion something that is worth celebrating 20 years from now. Let us make the best of the intriguing program offered to us today and tomorrow, challenge ourselves, and learn from each other. Thank you very much.